On the show today, we have Keith Ferrazzi, and here is why he is awesome. He is a renowned executive team coach, keynote speaker, influential thought leader, and founder of Ferrazzi Greenlight, where he has spent over more than lots of years, 20 of them, in fact, coaching Fortune 500 companies, unicorn startups, and even governments. 2024 recipient of the Coaches 50 Award, which recognizes the world's most influential executive coaches. His columns, you might have seen them in Harvard. We're really close, me and Harvard. We call it Howard. Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal, and many others. He's the #1 New York Times bestseller. You may have heard of some of his books, Never Eat Alone, Leading Without Authority, Competing in the New World of Work. He's got a new online course you may want to check out called Beyond Connections at connectedsuccess.com. And his latest book, in fact, that we're going to dig into today is called Never Lead Alone, 10 Shifts from Leadership to Teamship. I don't even know what Teamship means. I'm curious about that. Hi, Keith.
Russell, thanks a lot. I'm looking forward to this. We've got off to a fun start.
Fair, totally fair. I've got questions about definitions, because that's one of the big things on this show is defining what the hell we're even talking about. But first, Keith, I like to ask all my guests this same question to kick us off, which is, sir, what is your best or worst employee experience?
Wow. I'm living one right now that, sorry, just getting over a cold. I'm living one right now that I think be happy to share because it's real and it's poignant. I had a business partner who was a senior associate at the firm that I lead, and from the day we hired him, there was something that I felt inconsistent or incongruent with who I was and what I wanted to bring to the market. That said, he got extraordinary results with clients. And inside the firm, he was not an easy person to work with. Ultimately, the best way we figured out to work with him was to, in a sense, isolate him, give him resource, let him do his stuff, and that was fine. Could not be more inconsistent with what we teach our clients and our values. Ultimately, I found out that he was a thief. And right now, we're in a protracted legal situation. I'll tell you, I feel like this situation is one that rests on my shoulders for not having trusted my instincts and the challenges that this individual brought to me emotionally. I tried so hard to make the relationship work. I had coaches, I had therapists. We tried so many different things to make it work. And everybody kept, suggesting that this individual was, a unique personality psychology type. I knew it in my gut. And because he was making money for the firm and he was making money for himself, et cetera, and it was all good, it was working, but it wasn't working. And, it's one of the more poignant lessons that I've had in business, staying core to my instinct and values.
Thank you for sharing that. One of the biggest roadblocks I talk about leadership ecosystems is sort of this gaslighting, which is we see what's in front of us, but because they do this and do that, and they're a special case and they're different, we justify the behavior. I know I've been with horrible coworkers and leaders, but because they drive results, other people are like, no, you must be wrong. They're not bad leaders. They look at what they deliver. Aren't they great? So I kind of want to dig into the point that you were kind of gaslighting yourself to some degree, or people.
Well, I was just going to add that I was smiling because that was one of the things that the therapists suggested, which is despite all of the evidence of this individual making people cry, having people say they would never work with them again, etc. It was always somebody else, and it was always victim. From their perspective, the gaslighting that they used and leveraged was ingenious. And it got me to the point where I was like, wait, what am I doing wrong here? And I'm sure there were lots of things. As I suggested, this was complicit, right? When you have an associate who makes you who creates deep anxiety inside of you, right? Um, your job is to make sure that if you've tried repeatedly to manage that relationship, you have to walk away. And in this case, walking away would have been severing the relationship early. Um, and that's, I think that's a good lesson. You're right. Gaslighting myself, independent of what they were doing. That's 100% right.
How do you, I'm going to ask a little personal though, is that so you teach teamship, never eat alone. This is how we do. And to your point, you're like, I actually went against my own teachings, my own beliefs of what I did to justify and allow for this behavior. From a mental health standpoint, from a moving forward standpoint, what are you taking with you? Because this is a journey. I get it. Like I'm right there with you going, this is the right way to work. But then when we're presented with it, sometimes it gets super personal and super emotional. And it's a lot, it can be a lot harder to go, and for lack of a better term, practice what we preach when we're in it. What are you carrying with you out of this experience?
Well, look, this is a good segue um, to to the book that I've written and what we teach. The reality is, and I was saying this just the other day. You mentioned my new course, connectedsuccess.com. I was doing some real time coaching to the members. I do it on a monthly basis, and I was mentioning to a particular individual, if you want to be great in your life, you've got to be willing to work with people who are so good that they pull you up to greatness. And that's particularly true of entrepreneurs who tend to hire people that support them instead of partnering with people who are better than them. And in a workplace, we should be looking for, and also yesterday I was coaching a team. This team was a major corporation re-engineering their supply chain. And I was saying to this group of individuals, for you to be great, for you to be the leading supply chain in the world, you're going to have to partner with parts of the organization and AI native founders and etc. who scare the shit out of you. Because leadership today is we're puzzle makers. And what I mean by that is our job isn't just to do our job anymore. Our job is to be able to put together the group of individuals that are critical in cracking the code, in breaking through the glass ceilings, in achieving things we've never achieved with, by the way, a new technology that nobody fundamentally has mastered, AI. And so in this case for me, that I didn't have a team that checked me. And this has been a journey of mine for a very long time. I mean, I write very humbly in my books that I am often the last individual to learn my own principles and bring them to life. But I have the pleasure and the honor of being one of the best in the world at coaching high performing teams. I've repeatedly done hundreds of them in some of the most powerful, prominent teams, some of the most important startups, and as you mentioned, now even small governments trying to double their GDP. And I see the cycles, and often I am blind to see the cycles in myself. So how does one do that? With your team. I have that today. I have an extraordinary president of our company who is just no bullshit and puts the mirror up to me all the time. And I know that he cares deeply about our mission, and he cares deeply about me. And we are what I call co-elevating partners. Co-elevation is a term that I created because collaboration isn't enough. We need to, in the process of working together, we need to be pushing each other higher. That principle of co-elevation. I have been in marriages that weren't that. I'm in one that is that today. And we all have to make the assumption that every damn relationship of our life needs to be co-elevating. And that's a personal choice, and that's hard work.
And how many studies are out there that demonstrate the further you get up the quote unquote ladder of an organization, the more and more you're pushed away from those you can trust around you, that you self isolate almost the higher you get up in an organization. Tons of studies that even demonstrate
Well,
sociopathic behavior of leaders because they're being rewarded for delivery, not for being leaders. So they're actually pushing themselves further and further away from that team scenario you're talking about.
there's nothing that saddens me more than when people say being at the top is so alone. That's a personal choice. That is a personal choice. It's interesting. I wrote my early work around high performing teams right after the book Never Eat Alone. Studied small groups that wouldn't let each other fail. I studied AA. I studied Weight Watchers groups. I studied YPO forums. And what I found, interestingly enough, is people who fundamentally transform their own lives in a YPO forum weren't the ones who were bringing that back into how they treated their teams. And it's like, it's such a choice. We should be, as I mentioned, every critical relationship, personal or professional, should set a new standard. And I call it a co-elevation standard. And it really is, it's a standard of intimacy, generosity, candor, and accountability. It's a standard at the performance level, butt kicking accountability, hold each other accountable, right? High degrees of candor and transparency, all on the table in the room, not meeting after the meeting, back channel, conflict avoidance. Those two attributes are the performance attributes. But to lead with a sense of generosity, of service to each other and to the mission, and to lead with intimacy and vulnerability so that we're coming to the table with humility and openness. Those principles are defining of a high performing team. And we need to set that standard for all critical relationships of our life.
You're using all the right words, Keith. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I agree with all those words. My challenge in any organization is that a lot of leadership will have their own definitions of what those words mean. And they will cater it to what works for them rather than what might work for the organization. I'll give you an example. How often is responsibility confused with accountability? I've talked to many leaders and they're like, well, I'm responsible for this. I'm like, yeah, that's your job description. Accountable is if things go right or wrong and how you own it and how you tweak it to not do it again. But there's a lot of that confusion with responsibility. Think it's interchangeably. How do you
Yeah.
work with
Look,
teams that sort of like, no, these are the guardrails. These are what they actually mean to define them.
yeah. I was actually looking to see if I could grab a slide to show your folks, but look, I think I said this yesterday in front of this company, the top 100 leaders of this business. I'm going to say something really bombastic, and it'll piss off a lot of people.
Go.
I don't believe in bullshit culture conversations. I find words vacuous, and despite the fact that I have a significant part of my business that makes a living out of creating these clever words and posturing them, I don't actually believe that you make a difference in organization with words. I believe you make a difference in organization through practices and process. And let me explain what I mean by that. And I'll tell you a little story. I grew up in a very poor town of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Latrobe actually, during the crash of the steel industry. And what crashed the US steel industry was the arrogance of American steel management versus the Japanese that had actually taken American principles of manufacturing, total quality management, Six Sigma, continuous improvement, brought it to the Japanese and used American principles, academic principles of Deming, et cetera, used those to turn around and create better, high quality, lower price steel. And if you think about that, the transformation of culture change came through process and practice. The process and practice of Six Sigma changes culture of a manufacturing organization from top down to bottom up, from empowered teams to empowered teams from hierarchy. And it was process and practice that changed. Same thing happened in the early 2000s with Agile. We needed more software. We created engineers created process and practice change to be able to get greater software throughput through the adoption of Agile. Now, here we are today in a brand new world. We've been in a brand new world for quite some time, but it's a new world with AI. And yet we still work in meetings the same way we did in an industrial era as the mechanism of our collaboration. We've had the Google software and the collaboration stack and the Teams rooms for a long time. But if there's a problem, we still throw people into a meeting where only 4 out of 12 people are heard. Now, if we collaborate asynchronously before meetings, you have an increased. I just got an award in London called Thinkers 50. Mm-hmm. I was honored to be inducted with people like Amy Edmondson and others of the top 50 thought leaders of the year, and I sat with her on a panel. And this is the woman that iconically created psychological safety. And I was able to give her some research that our research institute created. If you collaborate asynchronously before a meeting and you ask the question, like, what are we really trying to solve here? And everybody write it down before you show up in a shared document that you look at. If you do that, your psychological safety goes up by 85%. And you show up in the room with greater truth telling. And by the way, the cycle time, instead of starting a meeting where only 4 out of 12 people are heard, and then you need to go have subsequent meetings, you start it beforehand where 10 out of 12 people feel that they're heard. You come into the room and you land the plane. Shorter cycle times of getting shit done, higher authenticity and transparency because of, introverts have a chance to think, not just speak up, etc. Simple process and practice change of moving to asynchronous collaboration versus meeting-based collaboration. That is focused on in chapter 6 of my book, where I talk about 21st century collaboration. But what we've done in the book is we've curated a new set of processes and practices for how teams collaborate. And I don't care about the words. Like, I will go in front of many teams who have had, their leadership principles ringed out of them in some wonderful way, and they've got posters on the walls. I'm like, fine, I'll use your poster words. Let's talk about the process of how we collaborate. Let's talk about the practices of how we kill report outs and move to stress tests, which I can explain, which is a really interesting shift. So anyway, it's the process and practice change that changes leadership. And what I'm moving to is teamship, where we expect more from our teams. What's the social contract of how a team works together? Most teams have mediocre social contracts. I use social contract in place of the word culture, because I want you to think about the contract among people, which is really the culture. And in one room, we don't challenge each other because that would be throwing each other under the bus. In another room, we challenge each other because we won't let each other fail. That's a social contract. And so I asked the average leader, what social contract have you created among your team? Most leaders create a hub and spoke social contract between them and each individual, and they don't get out of the way and create the social contract among the team. The team should be giving each other feedback, not just the manager. The team should be holding each other accountable, not just the manager. So by the way, each of those is a chapter of the book. How do we shift from leadership to teamship? And we ask our teams to step up and meet each other in a different social contract.
So were you influenced on looking at leadership as a way of, this is too singular? Is that what sort of pushed you into, we need to fix this, we need to change this? It was leadership in your mind looked at as something that one person does, one person moves up the organization, and that it needed to be, I'm just trying to figure out what was broken in leadership that you felt teamship was the answer.
So I didn't come at it I have never come at things from an HR perspective. So if you use the word leadership or teamship, one would presume that I was coming at the world from the perspective of being an architect of human behaviors or relationships. That's not what I was trying to. So I wrote Never Eat Alone, which, mind you, that book, I never thought of that book as a networking book. That book I always thought of as, what are the 10 tips to putting a booster rocket on your success. And the reason I wrote that book is because at the age of 30, I was chief marketing officer at Deloitte. And somebody came along and said, how in the world did you, at that young age, become chief marketing officer of Deloitte? How did you then move over and become head of sales and marketing at Starwood Hotels in your early 30s? What did you do? And I sat back and I was like, well, these are the things I did that built success. So, and I wrote a book on the practices of making success happen. Now, through relationships, but that wasn't the point.
Right.
Then what I did with Never Lead Alone, the new book, and the principle of teamship, I decided to start my own business 20 years ago because I saw how the behaviors at Deloitte allowed us to thrive and succeed. We were the lowest of the big eight in the 90s, and we have now achieved parity with, the Accentures of the world and McKinsey's, et cetera. And I saw the climb of that at Deloitte with a band of brothers and sisters taking hills together. Over at Starwood, we were notoriously siloed, evisceratingly competitive. It was not a good set of behaviors among the team. Fear-based culture, and we ended up having to sell below industry multiples to Marriott, our biggest competitor. So I recognized that there was a big difference. And I wanted to look at the practices. So when I started the business, I was invited I had earlier in my career, I had been invited to apply to a job at this startup in Seattle focused on selling books. And so I had met this guy, Jeff Bezos. And I was able to, when I started this business, to get invited into Jeff Bezos's executive team. I happened to be giving a speech at Harvard Business School, and it was in parallel with Jamie Dimon, and I ultimately was invited and have a conversation about how Jamie Dimon's team navigated the rough waters of the financial crisis in 2008. And I started studying what were the behaviors of teams that were crushing it. And what I saw were very different practices than an average team that I would go into. And I would start to extract practices. So one of them is this thing called a report out versus a stress test. What I noticed in a lot of mediocre teams from companies that were mediocre performers in their industry segment, is they would give these report outs. And the dynamic would be something like somebody goes through a 20-page deck for a half of an hour. Half the people in the room are checked out looking at their phones. And at the end of it, the executive and who is reporting and the CEO would have some conversation. Maybe one other person would chime in, and then they go on to the next report out. And that was pretty standard. What I saw in places like Amazon was a throwdown, a wrestling match, where everybody was involved. Jamie Dimon's team celebrated the fact that the lowest level person had the right to challenge and engage, and did. They were like actively engaged in every discussion. And so I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So I designed something that I had witnessed. I called it a stress test. So instead of a report out, this is in chapter 3 of the new book, Never Lead Alone. Instead of a report out, the next time somebody is supposed to update the team on something, do a stress test. The person shows up with a very short presentation, no more than 3 pages, ideally 1. And what it says on it is, here's what I've achieved, here's where I'm struggling, and here's where I'm going next. Putting on the page, here's where I'm struggling, that was the other thing Alan Mulally of Ford taught me, which was most people show up in presentations with all green lights. They don't show their red lights, and teams aren't celebrated for showing what's wrong. So you have to force individuals to celebrate where they're struggling, because what you're doing is you have an open invitation for the team to help you problem solve. Then when the presentation's done everybody in the room goes into discussions of two. Well, if you're sitting in the room, you turn to the person next to you, you open a Google Doc. And in that Google Doc, there's 3 columns. What is this person missing? Write it down. Like, what risk are they not seeing, etc. What idea could benefit them? Write it down. What innovation or idea? And the 3rd column, where might you help? Now, what we just did is what I saw in the Amazons and the Jamie Dimons, JP Morgans. What I saw there, I've just assigned to your team. You want a challenge culture. Some people have naturally, they have bred an engaged group of individuals that challenge each other. If you don't have that, assign it. So now when someone's listening to the report out, they know that as soon as we're done, they're going to have to write down, what's this person missing? What idea do you have? Where could you help? There's no phones open anymore. Right? So what I've done is I've just created a process or a practice, which fundamentally, you could use your words, change culture. Right? And that simple shift, the average team has a candor level of 2.4. Interestingly enough, I'm starting to see those numbers oddly go down now to 1.9. I think what's happened is, we've moved from the great resignation to the great preservation. People are now fearful of keeping their jobs, so they're becoming less psychologically safe, less challenging, etc. So we're down low in the candor score. But if you do regular stress tests over a 6-month period, I can get that number into the high 3s and low 4s. So process and practice change fundamentally transform the social contract and transform behaviors, and then ultimately transform outcomes.
So I love that idea. I think I'm immediately thinking about how I can put that into practice for a lot of things that I'm doing right now. So what I'm super curious about, though, is we talk about meetings, traditional meetings. We got to stop doing that. But the push has always now been, we just need quicker meetings. We'll do stand-ups. They'll be 15 minutes. To your point that this is what I'm working on, no blockers, moving on. It's almost an exercise in how quickly can you talk and get out of the room. You're talking about something that could take 2 hours. If it's depending on the team, depending on what they're talking about. Is it a matter of, it's not that we need less meetings or more meetings, we just need more valuable meetings. We just need meetings that actually matter.
So one of the things I just talked about isn't a meeting at all. It's asynchronous.
Okay. So this could be done over Teams. This could be done. It doesn't need to be set in a calendar.
So what you do is you send out a video of 5 minutes that says, here's what I've done, here's where I'm struggling, here's where I'm going. And then each individual, now they don't have the benefit of being in groups of 2 corroborating, but each individual can then write, here's what you're missing, here's an idea for you, call me if on this, if I can help. So the 3M did morning agile stand-ups, and they're a global organization, so they had to get people at ungodly times, like 9:00 in the evening in Asia, 5:00 in the morning in California, whatever. It's like they had to get these people together in an ungodly time to do a stand-up every day. And they looked at this work, our research, and they said, well, wait a second, maybe we could do that once a week, but why don't we replace the stand-up with an asynchronous stand-up? Why doesn't the person show up, have a 5-minute video, and anybody, anytime during your normal day can watch it and respond, right? So I to me, it's about I've been in plenty of stand-ups where somebody shows up and gives their agile stand-up, but nobody gives any commentary. Even though they might have it psychologically in their heads, they don't have the psychological safety to challenge each other in that stand-up. So again, to me, it's about how do you transform collaboration to be more effective, faster, higher degrees of a challenge culture. The challenge culture is what will change your business. Now, you can do it like Ray Dalio does, who wrote the book Principles, and they are a very difficult culture. A lot of people don't want to go work at Bridgewater. So you can do it off of that, or you can do it like Elf Beauty does, where Tarang, the CEO there, has created a culture of love where we won't let each other fail. Both of them have a challenge culture. One is based on relationships. The other one just is based on being right and getting it right. So I have a model that I use in the book where the challenge culture is in the center, and it's the most important. It's the meat of the behaviors and practices. Chapter 3 in that book, chapter 6. But at the bottom, you have a relationship layer, which is the foundation upon which you won't let each other fail. We'll be a challenge culture because we care. And there's a series of chapters about having shared resilience, in creating bonding, creating celebration. And at the top layer, it's how do we learn to collaborate in a 21st century fashion, like the kids graduating from Stanford, using tools and software to collaborate, not just throwing everybody into a boring meeting that doesn't work.
I'm looking at all these things. I'm like, action is everything. Like, you can talk to your blow in the face, but I actually even have it in my office that says action is the start. Like, nothing starts until action actually is underway, whether it's processes, whether it's even conversations can be an action. However, I hear that and I see that, but there's a lot of leaders that have no self-awareness, no understanding of the existing social contracts they have with their team. And I worry that they're listening to you or they're reading your book and like, I'm doing this tomorrow, with no concept that they have no psychological safety with their team or
Well,
any
the book
relationship.
talks about that. You build it sequentially.
Yeah. Where do you start?
So it's an intertwined DNA strand. You know, it's not just start here, finish here, then go to here. You know, it's actually, you need to build personal trust. You need to build professional trust, and they work interdependently. So for instance, if it's a cynical team that has not had strong relationships, and that relationship stuff feels a little fuzzy, then I always I always start with the stress test. Mm-hmm. Because what I can prove to a group is that some of these conversations you're afraid to have in front of each other, you can actually have, and people can handle it. We fantasize that our peers can't handle the truth. What's that? What was that movie? You Can't Handle the Truth.
Few Good Men.
Few Good Men. But the reality is people can. I was working with one company recently where the CFO I interview when I work with a team, I go around and I interview all the executives. I ask a few important questions. One question I ask is, what are the conversations we should be having in the room that we're not having? Such a powerful question. And everybody has an answer. Everybody has an answer. And for God's sakes, why aren't we having those questions? Everybody has an answer, including the CEO often has an answer. In this particular place, one of the problems was our CFO is curtailing our growth pace because they've got a chokehold on investment. They're too conservative. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. So I went around and everybody was feeling that, including the CEO. Now, this is a publicly traded company. So this happens a lot, by the way. There's a lot of organizations that point to finance and the process and practice and mechanisms of finance as being what's controlling growth. Now, if you go and talk to finance, they think that they're saving your ass from being stupid. And so I went to finance and I said, hey, just out of curiosity, what do you think your peers are saying about finance? And this particular CFO laid it right out. They're saying this, they're saying this, they're saying this. I was like, yeah, you know what? That sounds familiar. Why aren't we having this conversation in the room? And the CFO said, we should. And I said, great, let's do it. I went back to the CEO and I said, okay, we can have this conversation. The CFO would like to have it. And there was this sense of relief. And we had the conversation and they got to a really better empathetic place because they both better understood and they started collaborating and working through some solutions that got to a better place. And it's shocking. This happens all the time on teams. There are these unspoken things that sometimes it's leader focused, sometimes it's one particular member of the team focused, etc. My job is the easiest damn job in the world. Like I get heralded as being a savior of major corporations who are